Hello, guys. I'm going to go over the second part of chapter 4, which is the tissues, and we will cover the connective tissue and the muscle tissue. Okay. So I have already shared the PowerPoint before, so you can go over them, and I will go over the connective tissue first and then the muscle tissue. So the primary function of the connective tissue is to protect, support, and bind together other tissues of the body. As I said earlier, the major function of the connective tissue is to support and bind. And this is the most diverse and abundant tissue in the body. That means you can find this tissue everywhere because it is supporting other kinds of tissues. The main classes of tissues based on their structure and functions are connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone tissue, and blood. Okay. So if you remember the epithelial tissue, the cells were packed in epithelial tissue, but in connective tissue, cells are separated by large amount of extracellular matrix. And they all originate from, all the connective tissue originate from mesenchyme. So an egg and a sperm fertilize and forms the egg, and when it implants on the uterus, and when fetus grows slowly, it forms 3 layers of tissue that is called trigerm layer. Upper layer is called ectoderm, middle layer is called mesoderm, and inner layer of is called endoderm. And mesoderm, which is the middle layer of the embryo, later develop into mesenchyme, and that gives the connective tissue, including muscles and other stuff. Okay. So as you remember, the epithelial tissue has a lot of cell and less extracellular matrix, whereas connective tissue has very minimum amount of cells, but a lot of extracellular matrix. That's why extracellular matrix is composed of ground substance and fibers. So who produce this ground substances and the protein fibers in the connective tissue? That is by the cells in the connective tissue. And the main cell in the connective tissue are the fibrocytes, fibroblasts, and other chondrocytes, osteocytes, and other tissues. Based on these cells, we're going to classify them later. Okay. So connective tissue are made up of cells. There are very few cells, a lot of extracellular matrix, and those extracellular matrix contains ground substance and fibers. Fibers are protein fibers, which is produced by these cells in the connective tissue. So here is the basic classification of connective tissue. So you can see all connective tissue originate from middle layer of the germ, that is called mesoderm of the zygote particularly. And then from there, these mesenchymal cells, then they are pretty much multipotent cells. Then they differentiate into several kinds of cells like fibroblast, chondroblast, osteoblast, hematopoietic stem cells. And then slowly these cells like fibroblast becomes fibrocyte, and then connective tissue proper. Connective tissue proper later is divided into their structure, loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. Loose means the cells are packed loosely, and dense means cells are packed densely. And loose has several subtypes: areolar, adipose, reticular, and dense has similarly several other subtypes like regular, irregular, and elastic. Similarly, some cells differentiate into chondroblast, and that ultimate gives cartilage. Cartilage are also 3 types based on what kind of cells and matrix are found. They are hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. Osteoblast, on the other hand, gives osteocytes, which is bone cells, and they form bone. There are 2 types of bones: compact, which is hard bone, and spongy or loose cancellous bone. Similarly, some cells from mesenchyme develop into hematopoietic cell stem cells, which ultimately gives blood cells, and that forms the blood connective tissue. And you know, we will talk in detail in chapter 10 about the not chapter 10, maybe different chapter. I don't remember exactly the chapter here. That's the blood, okay? So this is the summary of the connective tissue. I will suggest when you finish connective tissue, come back here and go over this and try yourself whether it makes sense or not, okay? So now, connective tissue proper, the first type of connective tissue. It has two subclasses, loose connective tissue. They are areolar, adipose, and reticular. Areolar are the most common connective tissue. Adipose are the fat in our body, and reticular tissues are found in the lymphatic organs. Connective tissue, which is dense, are dense irregular, dense regular, and elastic. Again, what kind of fibers and how they are arranged. If the fibers are irregularly arranged, then we call them irregular. If they are parallel to each other, then we call them regular. And if predominant fibers are elastic fibers, then we call them the elastic dense connective tissue. Okay, so let's talk about first subclassification, subtypes of the loose connective tissue, that is areolar connective tissue. This is a modal connective tissue, and it has some features which is the common features of all other connective tissue. So as you know, the connective tissue, let me write down here in the note, connective tissue, like other tissue, contains cells, extracellular matrix, and extracellular matrix also contains fibers. And these fibers are produced by the cells inside the connective tissue. Okay, so here the modal connective tissue is the areolar connective tissue because it contains the common feature of other connective tissue. Okay, they are usually found under the epithelial tissue. If you remember, epithelial tissue has no blood vessels. So this is the tissue which underlie the epithelial tissue and provide nutrition and gases to the tissues. Surrounds small nerves and blood vessels. And it's a structures and functions shared by other connective tissue. That's why we call them connective tissue proper, or we call them a modal connective tissue. This also borders all other tissues in the body. It covers the like your heart, your lungs, your kidney. They are supported by connective tissue, and it is a modal connective tissue. That's why. Okay. So structures within areolar connective tissue and function. So what are the structures in the areolar connective tissue? They support and binding of other tissues. They hold the body fluids like lymph, interstitial fluid are held by these connective tissues. They also contains a lot of macrophage and the foreign body eating cells. That's why they fight infection. And some of the connective tissue proper also stores fat, which is the adipose connective tissue. So areolar connective tissue, as I said, contains cells, extracellular matrix, and extracellular matrix contains fibers. And those fibers provide support for the connective tissue. And there are three types of protein fibers in extracellular matrix. They are collagen fibers, they are reticular fibers, and elastic fibers. So fibers are basically the chain of proteins, chain of amino acid. They are the protein fibers. In areolar connective tissue, the cell's name is fibroblasts, which produce these three fibers. This is the main battlefield in fight against infection. So these cells also contains other cells. That's why they fight infection. And those defender gather at infection site. So when there is infection, this cell move to the infection site. And those cells are here. Apart from fibroblast, which is the cells of the areolar connective tissue, there are some other cells which defend the infections, and they are macrophages. They are big eater and they eat microorganism. Plasma cells which produce antibodies. Antibodies helps the macrophages to eat microorganism because they coat microorganisms so that macrophage can recognize and engulf them. Another cell is mast cell, which produce histamine, and histamine increase blood flow in particular area where there is infection. So white blood cells can move there, macrophages can move there and fight the infection. And the white blood cells, other white blood cells found in the connective tissue are neutrophil, lymphocyte, and eosinophils. So here is areolar connective tissue. As I said earlier, this is the areolar connective tissue. You can see these the cells is the fibroblast, and you can see the fibroblast nuclei. And these cells, these all nucleic cells, they produce fibers, and you can see fibers here. So these thick pink fibers, thick one, are collagen fiber. Very thin black ones are elastic fibers. And reticular fibers you cannot see here, but they are here. Very pinkish fibers, other fibers, like thinner fibers, are the reticular fibers. And you, as you say, the areolar connective tissue always underlie the epithelial tissue. You see lamina propria. You remember basement membrane, which is the top part of the basement membrane is the lamina propria. That is made by areolar connective tissue. Okay. Another is adipose connective tissue. You can see this is totally different from areolar connective tissue. This has cells, but these cells are large cells. You see plasma membrane of these cells. Their nuclei are in the periphery because whole cell is packed with fat goblets. This is vacuole containing fat droplet. Okay, and their nucleus are on the cells. And then there are very outside these cells there are extracellular matrix and fat tissue, which is a kind of adipose tissue found pretty much everywhere in the body. You see under the breast, a support under the skin, hypodermis, around kidneys, in eyeballs, within abdomen, breast, everywhere you can see adipose connective tissue. Here is another connective tissue that is called connective tissue proper, loose connective tissue, reticular connective tissue. Why we call reticular connective tissue? Because it has cells and it has reticular fibers. You see the very bluish dark reticular fibers. And then in this tissues, there are a lot of white blood cells, lymphocytes, mast cell, that is the histamine producing cells, and other macrophages. And they are usually found in the tissues which fight infection, and they are like lymphoid organs, lymph nodes, bone marrow, and a spleen. So those locations you find this kind of connective tissue. Now connective tissue proper. Earlier we talked loose, and now we go to dense connective tissue, and there are three types: dense irregular, dense regular, and elastic connective tissue. So dense irregular, you will see fibers are irregularly arranged. Regular, the fibers are parallel to each other, and elastic fibers are predominant in elastic connective tissue. So let's go one by one. You can see here, this is the primary parallel collagen fibers. You see each collagen fiber, like this fiber and this pink fiber. Here is one pink fiber, this one is pink, this one is pink, this one is pink. They all are like wave with each other, and they are parallel to each other. So that's why we call them dense connective tissue proper, dense, and regular. Okay, where are they found? You can see tendons, which attach your muscle to the bones, the ligaments, and the aponeurosis, means the end part of some muscles. Here is the connective tissue proper, dense connective tissue irregular. You can see here, this is from the skin and the fibrous joint capsule. You can see these fibers, collagen fibers. You see this collagen fiber and this collagen fiber, they are not parallel to each other. They are zigzag to each other. That's why we call them irregular. And this kind of tissue is needed for a stent. Like when you skin, you press your skin, what happens? It comes back, spring back in the same shape because it resists the pressure from different direction. Connective tissue proper, dense connective tissue, elastic. You can see elastic fibers here. These all dark fibers are elastic fiber. And they can spring back and forth. And that's why they are found in the organs where they need to expand. For example, your aorta, when your heart contracts, it pumps blood and aorta expands. Okay? That's why in the wall of aorta, outer part of the aorta, connective tissue is elastic. And there is a connection, like elastic connective tissue found in other organs like the vertebral column, wall of the bronchial tubes, where you need, like when you inhale, your bronchi is expanding and you need this kind of connective tissue. Okay, now other types of connective tissue, cartilage, bone, and blood, and we're going to go over them separately. So let's talk about cartilage, how cartilage is separate from other connective tissue. The one most important thing to remember about cartilage connective tissue can also contain cells, fibers, and extracellular matrix. But the difference is cartilage contains a lot of water, almost 80% water you will find in cartilage. Bone has less water. Blood is different type. It has the very liquid consistency. Okay, so cartilage are firm, flexible tissue, contains no blood vessel or nerves. You know, epithelial tissue contains nerves but no blood vessel, whereas cartilage contains no blood vessel or nerves. What does that mean? That means if you get any infection in the cartilage, it is very hard to heal. So it is good news and bad news. It is hard to get infection of the cartilage, and it is very hard to heal the infection of cartilage, because once you get infection, there is no blood supply, no nerves. So white blood cell cannot reach them easily, and it will be hard to heal. So matrix contains 80% water, which enables it to spring back from compression. That's why cartilage, like your intervertebral disc cartilage, your larynx, your other cartilage in the body, it can change the shape and spring back. The type of the cells in the cartilage is chondrocyte, and type of the cells in the regular connective tissue was chondrocytes. So you remember that. There are 3 types of cartilage, and based on what kind of fibers are inside them, based on them we classify them. And there are hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. So let's see what kind of fibers they are. Here you go. This is the photomicrograph of hyaline cartilage from your trachea. Okay, so what do you see? These are the cells. These are all white ring and the pink nucleus. These are the cells. So this is white ring is the cavity that is called lacuna, and inside the lacuna you have pink structure cell, that is chondrocyte. Okay, and in the center of the chondrocyte, dark area is the nuclei of the cells. Okay, so cells of the cartilage is chondrocyte, and they look amorphous, but they are very firm matrix. And inside the matrix, hyaline cartilage has predominant collagen fibers. Okay, and you cannot, the matrix are like so watery, it is hard to see the fibers here because water blunt the appearance of the hyaline cartilage. Okay, and you see this cartilage is found in the rib cage, where ribs bones are attached to the sternum through this costal cartilage or rib cartilage. Similarly, here you can see the matrix here, and you can see the fibers in the matrix. Okay, staining, you can see different staining, and you can see the cell, the chondrocyte, white chondrocyte inside the lacuna, and this is called, the fibers are dominant fiber here, elastic fibers. So elastic fiber you found in your ear, external ears. What you squeeze your ear, you can squeeze it, and if you leave, ear gets it, takes its own shape. And E for elastic connective cartilage is found in external ear and epiglottis. So E for to remember. Okay. Here is cartilage that is called fibrocartilage. This cartilage has also, you see the large lacuna and the chondrocyte nucleus here, and then fibers in extracellular matrix, and it is found in the intervertebral disc, and this also found in the disc of the symphysis pubis or knee joint. And when you jump, this kind of cartilage absorb the shock of the pressure. This is the bone, another different kind of hard calcified matrix containing many collagen fibers. So in this tissue, this is slightly different from other cartilage. You can see the bone, which is osseous tissue, a type of connective tissue, are made up of the cells, which is osteocyte. Osteocytes, you see the dark spider wave-like structure in this dark area, there is osteocyte in the lacuna. But these osteocytes are surrounded by these matrix, ring of matrix. So this ring of matrix is called lamella. And then the cavity where osteocyte live is called lacuna. And then in the center of the lamella, there is a cavity. That cavity is called central canal. And it is central canal which gives the blood vessel and nerves. So each bone is made up of this column of matrix, bone cells, and other extracellular matrix, ring of extracellular matrix. And this whole unit is called osteon. So this is the bone, and if you take outer rim of the bone, that is called hard bone, compact bone, and see under microscope, you will see column of bone, and each column is called an osteon. An osteon is made up of central canal, the concentric lamella, several layers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in between the lamella, there is cavity that is called lacuna. Inside the lacuna, you have the bone cell called osteocyte, mature bone cells. When they're growing, we call them osteoblast. Okay. And we'll go in detail when we do bone tissue in the chapter 6. Okay. Another connective tissue is the blood. You can see there is matrix, and there are several types of blood cells. Most prominent common bone cell, blood cell is red blood cell, and then white blood cells. Red blood cells have no nucleus. White blood cells have nuclei. Some are multi-lobe, some are large nuclei, and there is a small fragment of blood cells that is called platelets. You can see here only one platelets. Okay, blood is found in blood vessels or in your heart. They carry oxygen, fight infection, and get rid of carbon dioxide from your body. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about inflammation, because when you have trauma to your body, whether it is bacterial infection, burn, scratch, pressure, tear, anything, there is a response to that physical, chemical, or biological trauma. And that response to that trauma is called inflammation. Okay. And acute inflammation is by very fresh, recent inflammation. And the sign of inflammation is the local area will be hot, heat. There will be redness in that area because there is mast cell from the connective tissue releasing histamine and increasing blood flow in that area. That's why there is redness. And then there is exudation of fluid from the blood vessel into the extracellular space, and that causes swelling. Then that inflammation also irritates the local pain receptors, and that causes pain. So these are the 4 cardinal signs of inflammation. And that's why there is chemicals produced by the inflammatory cells and other white blood cells. They signal nearby blood vessel to dilate and increase the blood flow. So histamine is produced by mast cell that increase permeability of capillaries and increase the blood vessel. And that's why, as I said earlier, there is edema, accumulation of fluid in the interstitial space, which dilute toxins produced by bacteria, brings oxygen, nutrients from blood to fight infection, and brings antibodies from the mast cells, not mast cells, plasma cells, which fight infection, which helps macrophage to fight infection. Okay, so once there is inflammation and inflammation subside, there is repair. And repair happens by the mitotic regeneration of the nearby cells. So this repair can be regeneration, fibrosis, or by the organization. Okay, so what is regeneration? If there is a cut and the replacement of destroyed tissue is with the same type of tissue, exactly same, where there is no scar, that is regeneration. But if the gap is not filled with the same skin surface and the gap is filled with fibrous connective tissue, the connective tissue, fibrous connective tissue, which has a lot of fibroblasts, that is called fibrosis. And in that case, there is proliferation of scar tissue. You will have a scar. That's why what doctor do, if there is cut and inflammation, try to suture and make the adjacent end of the wound close together so there is no gap and no fibrous tissue deposit in the center. Okay. Capacity of regeneration for different kind of tissue are different. Some are good to excellent, some are moderate, some are weak, and some of the tissue in the body has none or almost none. For example, epithelial, bone, areolar connective tissue, dense irregular connective tissue, and blood-forming connective tissue has very good to excellent regeneration. Let's talk about epithelial tissue in your mouth. You cut last night while you were eating, and next morning you won't even remember it. There was a cut because it is replaced so fast. Some of them are moderate. For example, a smooth muscle, dense irregular connective tissue. It regenerates, but it takes time. Some are very weak, like skeletal muscle or cartilage. If you break your ACL or PCL in knee, it takes around 6 months to heal it. Similarly, skeletal muscle. If a skeletal muscle rupture, it takes a long time. And there are cardiac muscle tissue and nervous tissue in the body, which never, ever regenerate. Only nerve fibers, the axons regenerate, not the whole nerve cell. So you see, this is the cut in the skin. And you can see this generating. So nearby epithelial tissue is regenerating. And then blood vessel also, budding capillaries, they start budding, and then later they join together and replace these all fibrous tissue with the normal epithelial tissue. Okay. Now muscle tissue, there are 3 types of muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle, they are long. You see, this one, there are several muscle fibers. They are long cylindrical fibers. And inside the muscle tissue, skeletal muscle, they are multinucleated because they are fused together during the embryogenesis and makes one cell. And inside the cell, there is thick fibers. That's why they have pattern. You can see the patterning. Okay. They are found on your bone, attaching one bone to another bone, and it helps for the locomotion. This connective tissue is also called a striated muscle, voluntary muscle, because you can contract it whenever you want. Cardiac muscle are branch, but they are striated like skeletal muscle. Where they are branch, you can see this is one tissue, and then it branch. You can see here, this tissue is branching here. This tissue is branching here. And then each branch is section joined to each other by a gap junction. You remember the cells junction, gap junction, and that junction is called intercalated disc. And that's why these gap junctions allow sodium ions, potassium ions, and other ions to move from one cell to another. And this kind of tissue is found in the middle wall of your heart. That's why when there is excitation of one area of the heart, it is spread all over the heart. That is called syncytium of the heart. Smooth muscle cell, on the other hand, it's called smooth because there is no striation, there is no zebra pattern. They look smooth under the microscope, and they are involuntary, like cardiac muscle, also involuntary. And they are found in the wall of the GI tracts. So you see smooth muscle cells are spindle cells. Okay. Nervous tissue, as you know, they are made up of neurons and other supporting cells. These supporting cells in the brain are called neuroglial cells. Okay. Supporting cells are 5 to 7 times more common than the neurons. Okay. That's all, guys, for part 2 of your the tissue. And next time in lecture, we're going to go over skin, so we don't have to wait for the lab to cover in the morning class. Okay. Thank you, guys.